Minokachap, bonjour. Dok chinandam nungo iayan mampi. Thank you, Candace, for inviting me. My name is Elizabeth Stevens, and the First Nation where I belong is Kettle Point and Stony Point First Nation. Today, the reason I understand we've gathered here is to be involved and to listen to the panel discussions on decolonizing institutions, which is to be presented by the Indigenous Performing Arts Alliance. And I understand they have a collective voice for the Indigenous performing arts in Canada. So I thank you all for making a space in your life and to join with us today. And I notice one of the themes is around paddling together. And that is one that I acknowledge that we have to learn how to paddle together. Because if you don't, then the canoe doesn't travel the right way. And so maybe today we're going to be learning a few skills on how to deal with those. Always, because I'm on Anishinaabe King, and we're in a virtual world, and sometimes you may have traveled from other regions. I don't know exactly all of the areas that you're coming to, but I acknowledge that at the moment, I'm here in Kettle Point in what I consider Anishinaabe King. It's the ancestral recognition is also very important for my Nimishum Sinonik, Minwa Nokmisnonik, my grandmothers and my grandfathers. I have to acknowledge them. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge this land on which we are gathering today in the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, of the Ojibwe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Hurons. The wide dispersal of the wampum belt tradition showed the degree of cultural exchange between our First Nation groups. And so as the colonization continued, the Crown pursued the purchase of more native land, resulting in the Huron Tract, among others. So the Huron Tract purchase is also known as the Huron Block, and it's registered as a Crown Treaty number 29. It's a large area of land in southwestern Ontario, and it's bordering on Lake Huron, which is about 200 feet from my place. So I'm situated there. I would say, Ndo Mino Dapnagok, I now welcome you into this space. Now I would like to acknowledge the Creator and to present myself properly. Vijamnado, Elizabeth Stevens, Shaganashim knows Winawan, Bagakwa Anin Jin Kwango. Misamam Piwil Kwadang and Do de Ben Dagos, and Do dem Wajesh Owen. Creator, grandfathers and grandmothers who are here, we ask you to listen to us today. Spirits of the four directions, the east and the south, to the west and to the north, listen to us. Manadok, we wish for all of you to join us today. And Creator, we ask of you to help us to acquire understanding and wisdom. What will be in our future, or what will be in our lands, we ask you to always be with us in a good way. Those who have come to listen and to watch today, may they be inspired with a new vision. So be compassionate to all, that we may all come together and to know a good life. Mio, that's it, miigwech, 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 miigwech.
Miigwech, and thank you so much to Elder Elizabeth Stevens from the Chippewas of Kettle and Stony Point First Nation for opening our event today in a good way. Before we start, just a couple quick housekeeping notes. We will be taking a 5-minute break after the panel for a quick tea break. Please make sure to remain on the Zoom call as we will be putting you into one of the breakout sessions. When the breakout sessions end, we will regroup as I come back together and close the panel in a good way, and we're hoping you'll join us. Enjoy the panel, and we'll see you after the break. Hello and welcome. We'd like to start off by offering a very special thank you to our elder for opening our event today in a good way. Kwekwe, my name is Keith Barker. I am the Artistic Director at Native Earth Performing Arts, and I am delighted to be your host for today's discussion on decolonizing institutions through Indigenous ideologies. I come to you from Tikaranto, the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Tikaranto is a Mohawk word meaning the gathering place. This territory is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe and allied nations. A very special thank you to the High Commission for Canada in the UK for connecting the Indigenous Performers Arts Alliance with the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. We'd also like to thank the Department of Canadian Heritage, the Canada Arts Presentation Fund for their financial support of this event. And finally, thank you to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival for inviting us to share space and continue these important conversations. Today's event is presented to you by the Indigenous Performers Arts Alliance. IPA is a member-driven organization of professional Indigenous performing artists and arts organizations, serving as a collective voice for its members and for Indigenous performing arts in Canada. IPA provides leadership, support, representation, advocacy, and practical assistance for the national development of Indigenous performing arts. For more information, please visit ipaa.ca. IPA.ca. IPA would like to thank the 50/50 Performing Arts Collective and Wolf Eye Productions for their technical support for today's event. You can find their links in the comments. Our topic today is a big one. It's decolonizing institutions through Indigenous ideologies. And our goal is to spark conversation and build future international relationships with Indigenous artists and presenters for collaboration and presentation. You can read the full provocation, which will be posted in the chat. There we go. We understand today's discussions might be difficult for some, so we will be posting a Zoom link in the chat for anyone who would like to speak to an elder or a trained staff member at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. These are private spaces for anyone who needs a virtual space to debrief. After the discussion, we'll take a 5-minute break, then regroup here for a breakout session. These sessions are an opportunity to discuss what you've heard in smaller groups for 25 minutes, and then we'll come back as a larger group and share our final thoughts. If you have any technical difficulties today, please private message Adam Moffat or email him at adam, A-D-A-M, @ipa.ca. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. I will start with Lily Shearer, who will introduce herself.
Straight off the bat. Yamagura, everyone. My name's Lily Shearer. I'm a proud citizen of the Morawari Republic and Nibar Nations here in Australia. My people come from Northwest New South Wales, Southeast Queensland, and I'm a co-founder and the artistic director of Mugglean Performing Arts. We're based in Carriageworks. I'd like to pay my respects to my people and yours. And I'm sitting on my home country and it's really exciting to be here.
Just to know for all you people that Lily, it's 1 o'clock in the morning where she's at. So she's a trooper today for showing up and for being here with us. So Chimigwech. Lily has 30 years experience in First Peoples cultural development, arts management, and theater performance making. She's the founding, as she said, the founding member of Mugglean Performing Arts and is a graduate of Western Sydney University. Lily has been instrumental in the development and creative support for First Peoples community arts, forging links between First Peoples and not First Peoples companies. Lily has worked in leadership roles on a remarkable number of projects, and in 2016 was the recipient of the Rose Bower Award for the Australia Council for the Arts, and was one of 6 recipients of the British Council's Accelerate Indigenous Creative Leaders Program in 2012. Welcome, Lily. Next, Kevin Loring, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Kevin Loring good morning, everybody. My name is Kevin Loring. I'm the Artistic Director of Indigenous Theatre at the National Arts Centre of Canada and the founding Artistic Director of Savage Production Society, also known as Savage Society in British Columbia, Canada. I'm Inklakatmach from Kikomchin, which is the place inside the heart where the blood mixes in the Fraser Canyon. It's where the Thompson and Fraser rivers meet. It's my home village. I specifically come from a place called Mechompton, which means many snakes, or infected with snakes, or snake flat, as we call today. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Kevin is an accomplished playwright, actor, and director, and was the winner of the Governor General Award for English language drama for his outstanding play, Where the Blood Mixes, in 2009. The play explores intergenerational effects of the residential school system. It toured nationally and was presented at the National Arts Centre in 2010, when Loring was serving as the National Arts Centre's playwright in residence. He's a versatile artist and leader. Kevin has served as the co-curator of the Talking Stick Festival out in Vancouver and was an artist in residence at the Vancouver Playhouse Theatre. As the current artistic director of the Savage Society in Vancouver and a documentary producer of Canyon War, The Untold Story, and as a project leader and creator and director of the Song of the Land project in his home community of Lytton First Nation. He is currently the artistic director, as he said, of the Indigenous Theatre at the National Arts Centres in Canada. And we're really happy to have you today. Thanks for joining us, Kevin. Next, it would be great if Michael Walling would introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. I, unlike the rest of the panel, am not a First Nations person. I'm speaking to you from London in England, where I'm the artistic director of Border Crossings and the director of the Origins Festival of First Nations. I was brought up in the west of England in a place called Hereford, and so I suppose I could say that my mountain is the Sugarloaf and my river is the Wye. Genealogically, I come from many, many different places on the planet because most British people do, although they don't recognize it. But having had the DNA done, I know that I'm largely Scandinavian and Irish and Eastern European and Ashkenazi Jewish and Middle Eastern and 1% Nigerian. And that hybridity is something which is very important to the planet. And so is indigeneity.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Michael. Michael Walling is founder of Border Crossings in 1995. He studied history at Oxford University and subsequently trained at Trinity College in Dublin. He has directed numerous productions across 4 continents, winning awards for Two Gentlemen of Verona in the US and Paul and Virginie in Mauritius. He has directed the bulk of Border Crossings production and is responsible for the overall direction of the company. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
And finally, we would love it if Denise Bolduc would introduce herself.
Aw, really? And then, bonjour. Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here with these amazing people on this panel. I feel very humbled and privileged to be here. And thank you, Keith, and thank you to the elder. I originate from Northern Ontario in Canada. My family is from the Huron-Robinson Treaty Territory, but I like to say I'm a Lake Superior Anishinaabe Kwe, which is where the 3 Great Lakes meet. I was born right in the middle of all 3 of the Great Lakes, based here in Ontario, which I believe is a privilege. Fresh water. And my father is from Quebec. Originally, his family has been here for many, many, many generations. And that's where I get the name. That's very French, Denise Bolduc. And presently, I am the Associate Curator, Creative Producer with Luminato on contract. I maintain my independent sovereignty by being a freelancer. I'm working with Coach House Books as a researcher for a number of projects as well, and trying to keep busy and paying the rent during COVID.
Yes. Denise Bolduc is an accomplished cultural leader and a catalyst for creative growth. Denise curates, programs, and produces platforms inspiring artistic experience, exchange, collaboration, and engagement. She was the co-founder and artistic director of the Aboriginal Music Project and the founding artistic director and producer of the inaugural Planet Indigenous Festival. She has served as an Indigenous Arts Program Officer with the Ontario Arts Council and the Indigenous Dance and Music Program Officer with the Canada Council for the Arts. Internationally, she has programmed and presented in Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland. In 2017, she was the Ontario Arts Council's Indigenous Arts Award laureate. She has also been a recipient of the Solid Festival's Arts Leadership Award and the Indigenous Business Leadership Award. Welcome, Denise. It's good to have all of you here with us. So I guess we'll just start with some questions. I don't know if it's best if everyone just wants to jump in, and if there's silence, then I'll just ask you individually. But first question for all of you is, there's lots of people that are looking to engage with Indigenous creators, presenters, and producers. What advice would you give presenters and producers who are entering into these relationships with Indigenous artists and organizations? Michael, since you're one of those people that has stepped in, do you want to start?
Yeah, okay. I'm slightly loath to go first because I'm the only non-Indigenous person on the panel. On the other hand, I accept your point that the audience is more likely to be people like me who either have engaged with or want to engage with Indigenous creatives. The Origins Festival, which Border Crossings runs in London and has now run for over a decade, is a space in London where we gather Indigenous artists from across the planet. And we decided to do that because we felt there needed to be a space of healing. And I'm sure there are other people around the planet, more and more, who are feeling this very, very urgent need to bridge some of those very, very long-standing gaps between the cultures, to deal with the legacies of these appalling histories, and also to listen to ways of living which are different from that dominant one, which has caused so much damage over the centuries. Now that the COVID pause has made the point very, very clearly. When the planet just said, stop, you've all gone crazy, you're all doing far too much, you're all running around like lunatics, and actually take the time to pause and step back and ask yourselves what you're doing. And then in the middle of all of that, there came Black Lives Matter, and the sense that the brokenness of our relationship with the planet is also to do with the long-standing oppression which has come from the city which I'm talking to you from, and others, which have ended up dominating the planet for its own gain and displacing people from their lands, suppressing their cultures, and just getting it so wrong. And so it's really important that we reach out and have proper dialogues with Indigenous people, because they can show us the way and show us how very, very wrong we have been. But on the other hand, that means it's going to be difficult. And so I think my first piece of advice in answer to your question, Keith, would be embrace the difficulty. Accept that these are going to be difficult conversations. And therefore, make sure you have a space that allows for that, which is an equal space. And one of the things I've learned over the years of working with Indigenous artists is that you make an equal space through decorum and ceremony and through hospitality. Derrida said that hospitality is the beginning of ethics. It's by welcoming people to our land. And I learned that by visiting Indigenous artists on their own land and being welcomed with the most extraordinary warmth and the most extraordinary formality and ceremony and beauty. And so we try our best to reciprocate that. And I think that's the advice that I would offer, is make a space where people feel that they are genuinely welcomed, where you can clear the space for an equal conversation, and then don't be scared as to what will come up in that space, because it will be complicated.
Maybe Lily, if you'd like to talk about that, just having been someone that has been received or is also works within ceremony with.
Yeah, it's okay to be uncomfortable. In Australia, we've been uncomfortable for 250 years, but we still embrace, we still learn, we still go to school, we still learn the English language, we still. I will take me for example. My grandfather's father, my great grandfather, he came out here from Scotland, and he came out to the West, and they invaded our country. There was massacres. Let's talk about it. Let's heal together, because we can't keep having two stories that nobody's responsible for. It's time to talk about those hard issues, have those really deep conversations. Relationships, we love relationships. We'll find that we're related to each other in one way or another. You know, there's 5 degrees of separation, or 3 degrees of separation, they say. So yeah, it's really important to sit down, have a cup of tea. We love a cup of tea. It's the Scottish thing to do here in Australia, or the English thing to do. And listen to country. It's not just listen to us, but be silent and sit with country. And we have to do it ourselves as well. We can't expect people to decolonize their spaces, their mind, body and spirit, if we don't. And because it's got to start with an individual. You can't decolonize an institution. I mean, it's a great dream. It'd be wonderful if you could, but institutions are made up of people, and people are the ones that I've got to colonise. You know, sitting on the riverbank a number of years ago with an elder, and just happened to see him again recently, and he said, "See the roots in the trees, Lily?" And I said, "Yeah, Unc." He said, "They're strangling each other, aren't they?" And I said, "Yeah, they are. They're all wrapped around each other and they're pulling at each other." He said, "The land reflects how we as humans are treating each other. And if we treat each other with a bit more understanding, respect, communication, then the land will reflect." And I agree with you, Michael. You know, COVID's telling us all that. You know, for me, it's Earth jurisprudence. It's Mother Earth saying, "Hey, I've had enough. Slow down, you guys."
Yeah.
The Spanish flu did it. Now it's doing it again.
Yeah. Kevin and Denise, both of you work, like Kevin, for those who don't know, Kevin is the artistic director of the Indigenous Theatre at the National Arts Centre, but there is also 2 other sections. There's a French section and an English section theatre. So you're working with this very large institution of a newly created Indigenous theatre. Like, in terms of that, when you're engaging with those people, what is some of the advice? And also when you're working in community, when you're back home working in community, what are some advice that you would have for people that want to engage with you?
Thanks for that, Keith. I really love the comment, Michael, that hospitality is where you start, right? Like, when we talk about land acknowledgements, for example, people get really freaked out. And really, what is a land acknowledgement? It is a part of our decorum. It is a part of our of hospitality, of our laws of hospitality, of acknowledging where you're from and where you're at. Like, I live and work and raise my family on the land, the unceded lands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe, your people, Keith. And so to be mindful of that is the starting point. That's all that is. That's just that's the hello, how are you, right? That's the starting point. And people kind of go, oh, let me go there. And so I think that starting with those kinds of we have back home traditionally we had the laws of hospitality, how people were to behave when they were visiting your territory. And those laws are really simple. Like, don't take more than you need. If you are received, be respectful. And then when you're done, you leave respectfully, right? And then and that's really like the base of it, right? And so at the National Arts Center, which is this massive colonial institution, truthfully, with an English department, a French department, an orchestra, live music, like a popular music and variety, and then Indigenous theater, which is the newest discipline in the building. For us and for the institution, it was very important to recenter the Algonquin peoples in that building. That has been a huge goal of ours. That's been like this department. And so to try to find a way to, because it is an institution on unceded lands and built like kind of like a bunker. It's an art institute where elite artists come to perform for an elite audience typically. Our job, I believe strongly that the job of my department is to try to break that down a bit, not a bit, a lot, so that the Indigenous people feel comfortable in that space. And so what does that require? That requires a whole new mindset. That requires a whole new understanding of what kinds of activities belong in that building. And so, but you start with, well, whose land are we on, and whose is this? Who is this for? And you start with those protocols, those understandings of hospitality. And the same is true for when I'm working in community. So with my company, Savage Society, in British Columbia, we do a community project every year, except for this year because of COVID, where we go home and we take creation stories and we source these 100-year-old recordings of our songs as source material to create plays with a community ensemble. But that whole process also had to follow those protocols and those understandings of hospitality. How do you hold a company of 40 community members who in the middle of fishing season on the river? How do you hold space for those families to come in and be a part of it safely and to feel good about it, and to let, so that when they leave, they feel full and that they have more than what they came to the room with. And those are really basic things, right? It's not that difficult, but they do require a lot of thought and a lot of consideration that go beyond just your schedule, that go beyond just your metrics that you're trying to accomplish as a company or an institution, that go beyond what your expectations might be, right? Because those artists, those Indigenous peoples, those Indigenous bodies have needs and have a different view, perhaps, than what you think that you're doing. No, and so you have to be able to accommodate that, to hold it, to be able to hold those artists and those peoples in your space in a way that doesn't impede them or doesn't infringe upon them as beings. And so it takes a lot of thought and consideration.
That's great. Thanks, Kevin. Denise, as a independent producer, I mean, you work with so many different organizations. You are, working in community, you're working with Indigenous artists, but then you're also working with them in spaces that are with producers and presenters that are non-Indigenous. Like, I think of all of us, have probably seen more this through your independent work as a producer. Like, how do you manage that? Like, what are those conversations you need to have?
Well, I like my colleagues here, you become a buffer in between, and sometimes the punching bag in between the artists and the institution, which is by choice often. I've always worked to create place in the institutions, in these festivals, to challenge both the artists and the people who work in the institutions. It hasn't been easy, but it's getting better. I find sometimes it takes a long time, and people need to understand that trust and understanding of where artists are coming from, and you know, being able to be in those spaces. Like, I remember being at events where, you know, the Indigenous artists were at a stage that was in a field where there was, you know, you had to cross over through mud to get to that stage, and no one went there because, you know, it was too far away, and it was easier to stick in the other areas. And now I'm finding a number of places are putting and holding space for Indigenous artists that are at the forefront. And to speak to what my colleagues have already talked about, pace. Pace is absolutely absurd when you're working in these institutions. It's too fast, too complicated. The contracts are unbelievable sometimes, and the language and the requirements, and you know, it's something I've been really looking at as a big hurdle for a lot of artists, especially artists who don't have managers or agents, or, you know, companies like Native Earth, to be the presenter and co-partner in the presenting. So, and I'm really looking at how do you create protocols. There's a young artist out west, Kevin, what's her name? And she's created a protocol for relationships when working with her theater, you know.
About Kim?
Yeah, Kim. And I really find that fascinating because it develops a different way of looking at relationship as opposed to exchange, like a business exchange. So relationship is at the core with working with many Indigenous artists. I'm not saying all Indigenous artists work from this place, but relationship and that time to give to the relationship is really, really important. And relationality is at the core of hospitality, time. Give that time to understand. Don't be so resistant or scared to open that space, because the process will be 100 times more rewarding than, you know, and then when you get to the product, that will be even more incredible and spectacular and moving as an experience. So the process, and you know, there's the creative process, but there's the relationship process that is at the core, and the care. We need to take more time to care for each other. And I think for me that is sort of some of the places where I come from when I'm working with institutions. It doesn't always work out, but yeah, you know.
Yeah, and on that point, I mean, we talk about like things become transactional, and everybody, we all get into the business of that, and we're always reminded, like luckily at Native Earth and probably Kevin at the NAC, there are moments when we get into the, you know, everyone picks up the pace, and then we get into the place where we are reminded by communities like, whoa, 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 you know, there are lots of people who call us out, lots of aunties who say, hey, you need to slow down, we need to do this. And so we're constantly being reminded, and I feel like a lot of these presenters and producers don't necessarily have the benefit of aunties telling you what to do, like, and reminding you of what's important. And a part of that I'd love to ask you all, because I think for some people it's business as usual, and then they book or they bring in an Indigenous artist, and they become scared, like they don't want to offend and they don't want to upset, or they don't know how to engage. Sometimes they just decide to like ignore that person. Like if we just ignore and don't do anything, then we can't offend, or they, you know, it manifests in a bunch of different ways. What would you say to people who are afraid? Like afraid to engage, or don't know how to engage, or, you know, feel at a loss in these moments, or feel a lot of anxiety around this stuff? If anyone would like to start, or do you want me just to call people? Yeah.
Call people.
Okay, Kev, go ahead.
I figured that would happen. I think that there's always a bit of apprehension when you're going into the unknown, right? Like if you don't know what you don't know, you're going to be like walking on eggshells and tentative. And so the first thing to do is to ask, is to just ask, you know, ask folks what they're comfortable with, what they require, what they expect, you know. But also you are not powerless. People are not powerless. There's a lot of material that it does exist, that is out there that you can find. But I think that whenever you're engaging with anybody, especially Indigenous, it's important to ask those questions. Like, what do you require? What do you expect? What do you need? How can we make this process easier for you? And so, for example, like when folks come to the NAC, often, especially if they come from overseas, like Jacob Boehm was here last year, and you know, he immediately asked, "Can I meet with an elder to be welcome to the territory?" Right? And this is with a different department. This is the dance department, right? And they were like, "What? Like this? This is like second nature for us, right?" And of course, we accommodated that. Absolutely, we did. And with some help, luckily for the NAC, they have the new Indigenous department in the building, so they have a ready resource of any kind of those questions show up. You know, and so trying to accommodate those kinds of needs. And so for a non-Indigenous company or a non-Indigenous art organization bringing in Indigenous artists, and they don't know, for example, if you are inviting Indigenous over, and say, well, especially this happens in Canada a lot, and they do ask something like that, and the organization doesn't have a relationship with the local Indigenous community, right? There's an opportunity for you to begin building that relationship, right? Spurred on by another visiting Indigenous artist, right? So there's opportunities in there. So I think it's important to look at this as a learning opportunity, right? Look at these engagements as learning opportunities, and to not be, it's so shy. Why everybody so shy, right? Like, I think there's a reason that humor and teasing is a huge part of our culture, right? Like, if you're not being teased, it means they don't like you. You know what I mean? Like, if you're not getting a little bit, you're not getting ribbed a little bit, it means that they really don't like you. And so often what the teasing part of our culture does is it opens up, right? Breaks the ice, loosens it up a bit so everybody's not so serious. So that you can have a dialogue, so you can have an exchange, so you can get to know people on a real human level and not just as functionaries within a system, right? I think that's a big problem with institutions is everybody's got their role, and everybody's got their cubicle, and everybody's got their thing that they have to do, and you have to meet that goal or else you're in trouble. And so often, you know, that flies directly in the face of something that is a bit more flat and round, which is an Indigenous way of doing things, right? We're all sitting in a circle. We're all talking equally. We all have equal time and space to be able to contribute. I mean, that's not, you know, that's not how every company works or how all Indigenous folks work, but that is a central tenet in a lot of our cultures, right? That we are, here together, working towards something together, as opposed to individualistically going off and trying to accomplish a goal. There's a group, there's a responsibility to the group. There's a need to work together in a way that is holistic, and that we all come away feeling better about what we've done than when we entered the space. And so all those things come into play, right? And I think for the most part, I think Indigenous folks aren't there to like shame folks and beat them up. Although that happens too. Let's be honest. But I think we're all trying to, we want to be in those spaces. We want to be presenting our work. We want to be sharing our stories. We want to be doing it in a good way. And I think that good way part is another central thing that I think a lot of the traditional teachings always end with, and to do in a good way, right? Which means, again, that you leave the space better than when you arrive to it, or that you leave the exchange full for both parties. Like you receive something and you've improved by that reception, right? That there's an exchange that happens that is not just transactional, but is like on a spiritual, personal, human, intellectual, like a growth level, right? And that again, I think that holistic sort of focus of Indigenous cultures, right? That everything you do, you want to do in a good way, so that people leave feeling better, feeling improved, feeling full of light.
Great, yeah. Michael, as someone who is on the other side of that.
Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, I'm not from an Indigenous culture, but I'm also not from an institution. And I think that's quite important. It's, you know, my role in some ways is closer to what Denise was talking about, of being able to do kind of brokerage, because, you know, our company is quite a small organization. So the festival is a bit of a kind of guerrilla in London. So we deal with large institutions, but we are not one, which means that we do have the time and the nimbleness and the kind of uninstitutionalized organization which is able to have deeper conversations and actually has no problem shifting its enormous bulk, because there is no enormous bulk to shift. What does then happen, of course, is we deal with the British Museum. You know, let's call out the big one. And you know, the British Museum, of course, was set up at about the same time as the British Empire, and the point of the British Museum was to put the whole world under one roof, and the point of the British Empire was to put the whole world under one rule. And so it's very, very symbolic of all of that, and everything, every culture in there is presented as some kind of commodity. It's all in boxes. It's all like these precious objects which were collected by this person, it says so here. But of course, what's wonderful now, with so much agitation for things to be returned, so much activism, is that even institutions like the British Museum are recognizing that they have to open up in some way to dialogues with Indigenous cultures. And they don't necessarily know how to do it because they are big ancient institutions. But this is where people like Denise, people like myself, can start to broker some relationships and can start some conversations going. And so we worked a couple of years ago with the museum around their Indigenous Australia exhibition, and we brought some fantastic dancers from the Torres Strait who were dancing wearing the masks which everyone thought lived in little boxes. And that's a huge change, because suddenly it's not a commodity anymore. Suddenly it's part of a living, breathing human culture. And that's happening within an imperial space. And of course, the moment it happens there, it subverts the space. And you know, they tried hard with the hospitality and so on, because we were doing our best. But the truth was, at the opening event, it was still Prince Charles who spoke first. And we've still got quite a bit of work to do with the big institutions. But you know, the other thing I've learned from working with Indigenous people is to take the long view and recognize that whatever you're doing in your brief time on this planet, you're working because of the people who've gone before you, and you're thinking about the people who are going to come after. So these changes are not going to happen somewhere like the British Museum or the National Theatre or wherever overnight. But if we can just begin to shift ground in the current moment, then as we look into the future, things will get better.
Thank you, Michael. Lily, in terms of that, like you've worked with lots of people who are nervous to engage with Mughal, and I imagine, especially in Carriage Works, where there's lots of relationships in that building.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. What would you say?
Yeah, I would say the transaction for us is investing in the time. Understand that we're making our work from our place, our stories, our communities, and it's okay if it takes 5 years. Invest in that 5 years, because it's about the relationship. It's about building the trust. It's not about making a piece of work in 12 to 18 months to razzle and dazzle on stage. Yes, we want our work on stage, don't get me wrong. And we want it in our own spaces as well, as, you know, not everything goes in a black box or in a proscenium arch. There's work for us that's outside. There's work for us that's in small, intimate spaces. It's all about relationship and understanding of the story and where that story is coming from. So the place and people. At Mughal, we make work for our communities and our artists, our independent artists. We strongly support our independent artists, and sometimes, yes, we are the buffer or the punching bag in between, and that's okay, because we're big people and we can have those big conversations. And we just really want to understand, for you to put those stories out there in a space. It's about we're here for the long haul. We're not here for a 5 minute, oh, you know, we're going to the NAC to perform. We go there, it's over, and we don't have a relationship with them. We're not interested in that sort of work. We want to have a long relationship. We want to come back. We may not have a show to bring, but we want to come back. Oh, we're in the area. Oh, let's go visit Keith or at Native Earth. You know, we haven't got anything to bring over this time for Wasabi Chat, Keith, but we just want to hang out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just making those friendships, and they're long lasting and they're meaningful. And I loved, Kevin, your point of reciprocity. There's an exchange, and it's not always a transactional monetary exchange. It's an exchange of intellect and spirit, and you know, even the emotional. We need to talk about those intergenerational traumas. We need to heal together, because we need healing too. You know, there's this discourse that's happening, and it's, you know, in Australia it's been happening. We've got the big celebration this year, 250 years, inverted commas, you know, that our people, we're the oldest continuous living culture in the world. My fish traps right here in my backyard that I visit every day are older than the pyramids. They're 60,000 plus years old. And I visit them on a daily basis. There's no water flowing over them at the moment. So, and I'm really interested in that, because, and what the cotton farmers are doing to our waterways, because we're making a work about water. Water sustains us all. It brings us all together. We reflect the water. So what does that look like? And we're working with Angmatagsi from Nipissing First Nations on that work. And we have a residency coming up at Bundanon in 2 weeks' time, and we're super excited to be working with Penny Kutchi and Meg Paulin on that work. So what are those? And women's voices. So we do a lot of we can't talk on the behalf of men here in Australia in our culture, and we don't want to. Men have got their own place and their own, and we support that, but we'll step back and we'll step out of the road. And I suppose that's another point with non-Indigenous organisations, is stepping back. It's okay. And, you know, presenters and producers, move over, train your Aboriginal or First Peoples or First Nations, train them up, but know that you're going to become redundant. It's one of our projects we do at Muglan is the Yalamundi Festival, and it's now a national, it was a national playwriting festival. Now that I'm artistic director, playwriting is only young to us. It's very young in storytelling to us. It's only 40 years old here in this country, or 45 years old. And so I've introduced, and thank you, Native Earthing, for you know, dropping that seed when we first went over there. We've been telling stories through dance and music for thousands and thousands of years from time immemorial. So Yalamundi 2021 in January, with me as artistic director, is opened to storytellers of those art forms. So Yalamundi in the local Sydney language means storyteller. So it's a national gathering of storytellers. It's not the First People Playwriting Festival anymore. So those are the sort of things, and we have to challenge each other. And that's what we did as a co-artistic directorate of Muglam. There was 3 co-founders, 3 co-artistic directors. I'm the last man standing, so to speak, or the last person standing, I should say. So what is that? And making way for the next generation, we've just put on a digital producer, because we understand that all our work now, we haven't given up on the live experience, but we understand that all our work needs to have a digital platform as well as a live platform. So, you know, making way for the new. I'm on the way to semi-retirement. I don't want to be in Sydney forever. I'm over Sydney. So hence why I'm home. I'm over the hustle and bustle. And I'm making work out here with community. And if only community sees that and it doesn't get toured and presented, that's okay too.
Right. So yeah, Denise, in terms of that, I imagine that you've encountered a lot of fear, a lot of people worried about, you know, how to engage and just how do you deal with that, like with presenters and producers?
I just push through,
yeah.
I guess, is part of it. You know, I remind people the fear sits here as well. When I walk into these strange places and have to relearn every time how systems work, how people, personalities, how people lead, how people resist, how people, you know, how their fear and pride and egos get in the way, and then it pulls out my own fears and ego. So I think transparency and trust are very, very much at the core of a lot of the relationships I work in. And I struggle because I don't want to hurt people's feelings. I want to build more understanding and space. So more of our artists and creative producers have opportunities, paid opportunities, and positions and places within these places that receive a ton of money. Like right now, the conversation is, well, how many of these large institutions have paid salaries, whereas the artists are not being paid right now, right? Based on the situation we're facing. And I really believe that these large spaces should be open to providing space for creation in COVID guidelines, of course. But there needs to be more opportunities and support for artists right now. And with Luminato, for example, we're moving into a fall artists in residency program. And this fall residency program, I'm the curatorial lead on, and we have 10 artists. It will be announced probably in the next 2 weeks. And it's really exciting. It's 8 weeks long. They're being paid. They're not meeting in a studio space. They can create wherever they want to. I set sort of the context of what the residency program is, which is about coming in with kindness, respect, reciprocity, and a intent to lift themselves, but to lift each other. So the idea is to not create spaces that are competitive or compared to others. It's about allowing people to have time and, also connect with each other on a weekly basis in a platform, of course, like this, to have dialogue about whatever we want to speak about. So communication is a big one. And I always look at, I try to approach things and recommend things, and just now it's just like, read this. And one of the documents I'm always now endorsing is a document created by some incredible thinkers. It's called Towards Braiding, and it's about relationships and the difference between relationships. The Indigenous relationship, of course, is a weaving of a braid, whereas Western sort of concepts are build the bricks and the hierarchy. So it's for both sides to learn about how to work together and look at things differently. And so, I think people just need to listen, but also communicate. And someone pointed out, just ask questions. We're not horrible people. But also hold space, give space, and pay when you give those spaces.
That's great. Thank you, Denise. Well, I think we've given everybody a lot to think about. Thank you so much for your insights. It's always great to hear each of you speak. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. For those of you who are here with us, a reminder that we're going to be taking a 5-minute tea break now, and that we'll be back with our breakout sessions. These breakout sessions will be 25 minutes long. We will be randomly placing participants in the Zoom breakout rooms. Thank you again to Michael, to Denise, Lily, and to Kevin. Also, thanks to Cynthia and to Candace and to Lindsay for helping us, and Jade and Adam. To everyone that's helped make this possible, thank you again. Chi-miigwech, 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 chi-miigwech. And we'll see you at the breakout session.
amongst the trees, amongst you, my friend. Take me home so I can pretend to be home on Birch Island.
Everyone for your contributions to this conversation. I'm so sorry that it was cut short. We now are going to call upon our note takers to share some of what was said in each of the breakout sessions. We're going to first start with Brittany Johnston. Take it away, Britt.
Hey. All right, so our group talked about changing our minds about the idea of competition. There's enough love to go around. Struck by doing things a good way. It's not the same as excellence. Not being better than everybody else. Stop thinking that our centers are centers of excellence. And then looking at our systems, so presenting, pitching, showcasing, these are all set in their ways, and we need to look at those processes and the grading system that is attached to them. I apologize, I have a kitten baby. Decolonization is about deconstructing and finding a new way forward, creating spaces that are not about hierarchy, which is what creates competition.
That's awesome, and you never have to apologize for a cat. Thanks, Britt. Next up, we have Ty, Amy Grama. Take it away, Ty.
Hi, everyone. So I was note-taking for Kevin's session, and Kevin started by asking the group what stood out and resonated for them, and what really arose was that the emphasis that relationships are not it's the emphasis that our work is about relationships and not transactions, relationships above transactions. We also talked about the relationship building between institutions and Indigenous artists and everyone that needs to happen now. And that in order to do this work, those relationships are vital. Kevin also spoke about welcoming and protocols, welcoming artists and protocols of engagement to do your research and welcome the artist in as good of a way as possible. And then we started talking about the time that's needed to build these relationships and how that needs to be built into institutional and grant timelines in a way. And Kevin spoke about how we need to shift from working from a position of scarcity of resources, because that's not, that doesn't support an Indigenous way of working. And so mostly we talked about time and the importance of relationship building above transactions.
Great, thanks, Ty. Next we have Kat McLean. Kat.
Hi, so I was in Lily Shearer's breakout room. And so one of the things that we kept coming back to was Lily's phrase of sitting with country. So the idea of being still and quiet and listening to the surroundings, which is something that Lily has been learning since her childhood, talking about how the land reflects us and the land is our community, that there is also a draw to like make more work that's accessible with each other, that there should be more exchange between each other. Even we discussed how like creating time and space within institutions can be done by sitting with country, taking that time to reflect. And so much unlearning needs to be done in these institutions, and that can also be done by sitting with country. One of the final questions that we had was what type of community outreach can be done for institutions and what is realistic. And Lily's suggestion was to have a gathering before the presentation, let people eat, let people meet, let people have tea together, and bringing those people together. And also in doing that, that can also help our communities, our Indigenous communities, learn how to observe and participate in these artistic spaces. And then we were discussing the 5 questions that Lily was trying to ask Cynthia. There's a list of 5 questions of like, what did you observe in the show? Like sort of like putting the questions to the audience rather than waiting for the audience to ask questions.
Great, thanks, Kat. And last but not least, we have Breffney Caribou. Breffney.
Hi. So I think the biggest takeaway from our breakout session was the idea of building relationship. That was the word that I think that was brought up the most. As well, the idea of how helpful it is, how helpful asking is in regard to the subject of trying not to offend or how to approach certain parts of the unknown. And also the idea of hosting people as opposed to just presenting a show. And once again, kind of circling back to building relationships and creating relationships. Words exchange, cubicle to circle culture was also something that someone had mentioned. And yeah, there was also someone who was really struck by the very beginning image of the canoe as a starting point for conversation.
Thank you so much, Breffney. Thank you to everyone for sharing your insights with us today. We hope that you found this time as valuable as we did. A big thank you to our note takers, Ty, Brittany, and Breffney, who, it must be said, are brilliant artists in their own right and truly represent the bright future of Indigenous theater here on Turtle Island. As they say, the future is women. You will be sent follow-up notes after this panel. Please head to ipaa.ca, IPAA.ca, to join their newsletter or become a member. Thank you again to the Department of Canadian Heritage, the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, 50/50 Performing Arts Collective, Wolf Eye Production, and Nordist Media for their help with this panel. Lastly, I am now honored to reintroduce Elder Elizabeth Stevens from the Chippewas of Kettle and Stony Point First Nation to close today's event.
Miigwech. Miigwech, I've listened very carefully, and it has become apparent to me that circle teachings and sharing circles are the equalizers among the Anishinaabe. We don't have to compete to be heard. It's based on respect, and we're given the time, and we bring within that circle the balance, and the strength comes from when we share, and we share what's in our hearts and in our minds. I've heard about the interrelationships and weaving relationships, and we have the Wiingashk, which is our way of building relationships. It's the comes from the Mother Earth. And when we speak from our hearts, we've been given the gift of the Miigwans. We've been given the medicines. And if this is the Sama, and when I am given Sama by someone who needs time to listen, I respect that. That's a contract. And it's the most sacred responsibility we have to each other. So the relationships I've heard about needing relationships between individuals, creating spaces in time, and don't deny our dis-ease with one another when we are sharing, because that is the pathway and the road to developing the intercultural relationships that we need. Because when you get in the canoe, this is a Jimon, we take time to go out in the water, and it kisses the water, and we respect our land and our air, and we carry that fire within us and our beliefs, and it gives us strength to walk on this earth, to have Mino Bimadisawin, the good life. In closing, I would say thank you, Creator, Miigwech Kajamnado. Thank you for, again, all of the spirits who've come to visit with us today and joined us. Miigwech Manadok. We asked you to share this time with us. And Miigwech Kine Gamatukiwad. Everyone who shared, we're grateful. So be Joanna Mission, Gil Gabajajikadongwa, for all of those who came, have compassion on them. Joanna Mish Nong, Jikendamawat and Minobamagasawin, so that they come to know a good life. Be compassionate with us and be with us. We do Shanong Kinagigoish Chikayong Noga. Be with us as we do and go about our lives. Miigwech, 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 Miigwech.